Morning sunlight spilled through the small kitchen window of a modest home tucked in the suburbs of Edge Hill, Vermont. Laura Jennings, 36, was humming softly as she packed lunchboxes for her two children. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a warmth and depth that hinted at something long buried. Something sacred once. Across the table, her 13-year-old daughter Mia glanced up from her homework and smiled knowingly. "You're doing it again, Mom." Laura paused mid-hum, chuckling under her breath. "Old habits," she said, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. On the kitchen wall, framed photos showed birthday parties, family vacations, and wedding memories, but one photo stood apart. It showed a much younger Laura, seated at a grand piano, her face lit by a spotlight, eyes closed in deep concentration. Most people didn't know she had once been the top vocal student at Belford Conservatory, where they called her the Golden Voice. She had everything: prestigious scholarships, invitations from major orchestras, until the day her father suffered a massive stroke. With her mother long gone and no siblings to lean on, Laura made a decision many called foolish. She left Belford, gave it all up to come home and care for the man who had raised her. From that moment, she slipped into a quieter life, married Tom, a local history teacher, had two children, and eventually opened a small flower shop on Main Street. "You were mentioned again yesterday," Tom said as he walked into the kitchen and kissed her cheek. "The kid's music teacher still can't believe you studied at Belford." Laura offered a soft, almost shy smile. That was another lifetime. That afternoon, as she sorted through the mail, her hand froze. Among the bills and flyers was a cream-colored envelope, embossed with the unmistakable gold seal of Belford Conservatory. Her breath hitched slightly as she opened it. 30-year anniversary celebration. She read aloud. "The Board of Directors requests the honor of your presence at our distinguished alumni gala." Tom, now leaning on the kitchen counter, studied her expression carefully. "You should go." She shook her head, folding the letter closed. "They probably invited everyone from that decade. I don't belong there anymore." But that night, after the kids were tucked in bed, Tom found her alone in the study, headphones on, eyes locked to the laptop screen. He didn't have to ask what she was watching. He already knew. It was the same grainy video of her final performance at Belford, the one she only ever watched in the dark, when she thought no one was paying attention. "Maybe you should go," he said gently. "Not for them. For you." Laura closed the laptop slowly, quietly. "I made my choice. I don't need to go back to prove anything." Tom sat beside her, taking her hand. "Maybe it's not about proving anything. Maybe it's about making peace with a part of yourself you left behind. Not to restart something, but to close it properly." She didn't respond. But later that night, she climbed up to the attic. There, in a dust-covered trunk, were the fragments of a former life. Yellowed sheet music, worn notebooks filled with hand-marked annotations, and even an original composition. Never performed, never heard. She traced the faded notes with her fingertips, and the melody stirred in her mind like a familiar old friend. The next morning, Laura sat at her desk, staring at a blank reply email. After a long pause, her fingers began to type. "Thank you for including me. I would be honored to attend." She hovered over the send button, her hand trembling slightly, because in that moment she understood. The journey didn't begin the night of the gala. It began here with the decision to say yes, and when she finally hit send, something shifted inside her, an emotion too layered to name. It felt like fear and excitement braided together. A door she thought was locked forever had just creaked open. 2 weeks later, the Belford Anniversary Gala took place at a grand theater in the heart of Manhattan. That evening, a sudden chill rode in on the spring breeze, slipping through layers of evening wear and brushing against bare arms. Tom carefully helped Laura into a light wool coat as she stood before the mirror, adjusting the ivory vintage dress, her only formal gown, worn once to a cousin's wedding many years ago. "You look beautiful," he said, gazing at her a little longer than usual. Laura pressed her lips together, her fingers smoothing the simple bun at the back of her head. "I'm not afraid of looking out of place. I'm afraid I'm no longer the person they remember." "But you're still you," Tom said gently, "and you don't have anything to prove." The taxi dropped her off in front of the glowing theater entrance. White marble steps led to the grand doors, where guests sparkled in evening gowns and tuxedos, laughter echoing under chandeliers. Laura hesitated for a moment, her heart thudding like it had the night of her first recital, before stepping through the revolving glass door. Inside, the space shimmered with elegance. Crystal chandeliers floated overhead. Soft piano music trickled down from a balcony above, and glasses clinked with the gentle rhythm of luxury. It was a dream, one that had once been hers and had since faded into memory. She moved quietly, keeping to the edges of the crowd. Familiar faces floated past, many she didn't quite remember, but their eyes all had the same glint. Measuring, assessing, appraising. "Laura Jennings? Is it really you?" A warm, familiar voice called. She turned and immediately recognized the face, Charlotte Winslow, her former vocal coach. Now in her 70s, the older woman still carried herself with poise and a commanding presence. "I didn't expect to see you here," Laura said, surprised by the wave of comfort that rose at the sight of her old mentor. "I always knew you'd come back one day," Charlotte replied, her smile softening. "A voice like yours doesn't vanish forever." Laura was about to respond when a stir rippled through the crowd. A tall, silver-haired man in a tailored tuxedo stepped into the spotlight near the stage. His presence pulled attention like gravity. It didn't take long to recognize him. Mason Caldwell. Once her classmate at Belford, now one of the most celebrated conductors in the country. He had just been appointed artistic director of the National Symphony. As the lights fell upon him, the crowd shifted closer, orbiting him with champagne glasses raised, showering him with praise and admiration. Laura stayed back, hovering at the quieter edge of the gathering. Then Mason's eyes scanned the room. When they landed on her, he paused. His expression didn't shift, but something in his stance stiffened. He approached with the smooth confidence of a man used to standing center stage, a glass of champagne in hand, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "If I wasn't seeing it for myself, I'd think this was a joke," he said. "Laura Jennings, the vanished prodigy of Belford?" "Hello, Mason," she replied calmly. "Where have you been all these years? People used to bet whether you'd hit the Met before or after you turned 30. I just took a different path," she said quietly. "Ah," he echoed with a smirk. "A lovely euphemism for wasted potential. Olivia just wrapped up her 3rd European tour. Marcus was commissioned by the Vienna Philharmonic. And you, what are you doing with the voice they once called a wonder?" "I'm living," she answered. "Raising my kids, taking care of my family, singing lullabies at night." He tilted his head slightly as if considering her answer like a riddle. "Then prove it," he said. "We've got a stage, a piano. Why not give everyone a taste of what they missed?" She didn't even have a chance to decline before she realized all eyes were on her. The room had shifted. Now there were whispers, some curious, some amused, a few filled with pity. But the worst of them were expectant, hungering for a public stumble. Laura clenched her fists, not from offense but from something deeper, something restless that had stirred for years and refused to quiet. She thought of her father's last days, of her daughter's fingers on piano keys, of the music that had never left her. Not really, only grown quiet. Slowly, she nodded. "If you want me to sing, I will." Mason's brows rose in genuine surprise. Then came the gleam, half delight, half spectacle. "Wonderful," he said, turning toward the MC. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a rare treat tonight. A voice, once expected to reshape the world of music, who instead chose the simple life. Please welcome Laura Jennings." The spotlight flared to life. Heads turned, conversations dropped, and at the center of it all stood a woman in an old ivory dress, no heels, no makeup, no fanfare. But for the first time in 15 years, Laura walked toward a stage, not to impress, not to prove, but simply quietly for herself. As Laura stepped onto the stage, it felt like walking against a fierce wind. Each step pushed her through fear, through memory, through the quiet, smirking doubt of those who believed she no longer belonged. Her simple ivory dress stood out under the harsh spotlight set against the backdrop of deep red velvet. From the rows below came whispers that pierced like pins. Does she even remember how to hit a high note? Someone should have checked her vocal cords first. This has pity act written all over it, she swallowed hard. Beneath the bright stage lights and the oppressive hush of anticipation, she felt smaller than she had in years, like a ghost of the person she used to be. Down in the front row, Mason reclined in his seat, legs crossed, swirling a glass of wine with an amused smirk, the image of a man expecting to be entertained. At the grand piano on stage right, a young accompanist looked to her expectantly. Laura walked toward him and asked softly, "Do you know O mio babino caro?" He blinked in surprise, then nodded. "I do. Are you sure? It's one of the hardest arias in the repertoire." Laura gave a small, steady smile. "I used to be someone else before I became who I am now." She returned to the center of the stage. The lights were hot, and her heart thundered like a war drum. She closed her eyes. In the dark behind her eyelids, she wasn't at Belford. She wasn't facing Mason, or the glittering eyes waiting for her to fall. She was in her kitchen, singing lullabies to Ellie. She was in her garden, humming along with the wind. She was beside her father's hospital bed, using song when words could no longer reach him. And then she sang. The first note floated out like a breath, gentle, almost hesitant. But then it rose, clear and strong, pure as light breaking through. Clouds. The room seemed to still. The laughter stopped. Even the coldest eyes lifted in disbelief, because Laura's voice wasn't just sound, it was story. It held 15 years of silence every sleepless night, every morning packing school lunches, every moment she stood in the shadows of her former dreams, too busy choosing love to chase applause. Her voice wasn't perfect like it once had been. In her 20s, it was better. It had grown roots, it carried weight. Every high note, every sustained phrase, every shift in tone was soaked in the tenderness of motherhood, the ache of sacrifice, the serenity of acceptance. She wasn't trying to impress them. She was telling her story the only way she truly knew how, through music. As she reached the aria's emotional climax, the hall became utterly still. Some people closed their eyes, others clutched the hands beside them. And in the front row, Charlotte Winslow wept openly, and then came the final note, soft, steady, aching with quiet power. It lingered like an embrace offered to the past she had once locked away. Silence. 3 seconds. 4. No one moved. No one breathed. Then a single clap. Charlotte. Then another. And another. And soon the entire hall erupted into a standing ovation. Applause thundered from the back rows to the stage. Cries of admiration. Whistles, cheers. All folding into waves of sound so vast it seemed to lift her off the ground. Laura stood still. She didn't need to say anything. She had already said everything. Mason sat frozen in his seat, face pale, his wine glass trembling in his hand. No one was looking at him anymore. Every eye was on the woman standing under the spotlight, not because she had once been great, but because she had just reminded them why they loved music in the first place. She bowed her head slightly, then stepped down from the stage. Hands reached for hers. Soft voices whispered praise. She didn't remember walking back to her seat, only that her chest felt warm, her steps light, as though the very act of singing had given her breath again. And in that moment, Laura Jennings was no longer an outsider. She was the voice they hadn't known they were waiting for all evening. Laura had just returned to her seat, her hand still trembling slightly, when a voice came from her left. "Ms. Jennings, if I may, would you consider one more piece? Perhaps Vici d'arte or Laudate Dominum." The speaker was Marcus Bell, the composer who had been mentioned throughout the evening, the same man Mason had proudly boasted about earlier. He didn't wait for her reply before continuing. I've never heard anyone perform that aria with such emotional clarity. Your voice didn't just sing, it told a story, and I believe my audience needs to hear that kind of storytelling. Laura smiled politely, still dazed from the ovation echoing in her mind. I'm truly honored, but one song was enough. Not for them, came a second voice, this time from Olivia, the rising soprano star. Gone was the aloof demeanor from earlier. Now her expression was softened, even reverent. You reminded me why I started singing opera in the first place. Thank you. Laura nodded, unsure how to respond. The people who had eyed her coldly just hours before were now approaching with admiration. Handshakes, praise, even requests for interviews. Some asked for her contact information, others wanted to feature her in a magazine column. Even the ones who had turned their backs on her earlier were now acting as if they'd always known. Mason arrived later, this time alone. No entourage, no performative confidence. He approached cautiously. Laura, he said, his voice lower, uncertain, a tone she had never heard from him before. I didn't expect that. She waited. You kept it, he continued. That voice, if anything, it's even more powerful now. Maybe because I'm not singing to prove anything anymore, she said quietly. I sing because I love it. He nodded, swallowing whatever comment had been forming on his tongue. The New York Philharmonic's Arts Board is organizing a gala featuring accomplished alumni. I think they'd be very interested in you. Laura looked at him carefully. For most, that invitation would be a golden ticket back into the spotlight. For her, it was a door opening wide, but one that led away from the life she had built with intention and care. You could start again, Mason pressed, sensing her hesitation. I know directors, artistic managers. We could tailor a schedule. Weekends only, no major disruption to your family. I can help you manage it. You don't need to arrange my life around my family, she said, this time with a steady firmness. They're not obstacles I work around. They're the choice I embrace. Mason's face darkened for a moment, then softened. She could tell he understood, though he didn't necessarily agree. Have you ever sung just for joy, Mason? She asked. Not for critics, not for status, just because it filled something in you? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was answer enough. The gala continued around them, but for Laura it already felt like something that had passed. Later, as she stood alone by the large windows overlooking the city, Charlotte Winslow approached and pressed a business card into her hand. The community music school in Edgehill is looking for a vocal instructor, she said. 2 evenings a week, you might consider it. Teaching people who've never believed they had a voice. Laura looked at the card. Something warm unfurled in her chest. The idea of sharing music not from a grand stage, but through one-on-one discovery, through the eyes and voices of those just learning to believe in themselves, felt unexpectedly right. As the gala came to a close, a quiet taxi rolled up and took her home through streets dappled in light. She rested her head against the window, quietly humming a familiar tune. Not Verdi, not Puccini, but a little lullaby she had once written for Ellie. Tonight she hadn't chosen to return to her old path, but she had found a part of herself, again, a part that had never really vanished, just hidden, waiting for the right moment to rise in song. 2 months later, a new sign hung outside a small house on the main street of Edgehill. Jennings' Vocal Studio. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't gilded, just a hand-carved wooden plaque, with letters curved softly, much like the woman who owned it. Inside, the space was simple but full of warmth, an old piano polished to a gentle shine, white curtains swaying in the breeze, bookshelves lined with classical scores and blank notebooks waiting to be filled. Her first class took place on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, sunlight spilling golden through the windows. Her students came from every walk of life, a shy 7-year-old girl, a middle-aged man who had once dreamed of singing in church, a retired woman who admitted she'd only ever sung in her kitchen. None of them were there to chase fame. They came for something far more intimate, the chance to sing without fear of being judged. Laura didn't teach like a professor delivering theory. She shared each song as if offering a piece of herself. She taught them to breathe, not just to take in air, but to feel life move through them. She taught them to hold a note, not to impress, but to tell a story. And more than anything, she taught them to trust their own voices. One evening, as she was gathering sheet music after class, her daughter Ellie walked in, holding a notebook tight to her chest. "Mom," she said, "I wrote something. But I don't know how to put music to it. Can you help me?" Laura opened the notebook. The lines were simple, young, but deeply sincere, a poem about love. Not romantic love, but the love of a child for her home, for her mother's cookies, for the hug waiting after school. Laura smiled and pulled a chair next to her daughter. "I think I can," she said gently, placing her hands on the piano. The melody came softly, not perfect, not grand, but true. Ellie began to sing, her voice still unsteady but bright and clear. And in that little room, the sound of their two voices blended together like a quiet stream flowing through memory, carrying with it all the years Laura had once thought her. Music was lost. Beside the piano, on a small wooden desk, sat a framed clipping, not a photo of the gala, but an article with the headline, "The Woman Who Made Belford Stand," a forgotten voice that moved critics to tears. Below it, a worn notebook lay open, filled with half-written melodies, a pen resting beside it, still full of ink. She never went back to the big stage. She didn't appear on television. She didn't sign with any orchestra. And yet, she never felt more like an artist. For the first time in years, Laura was living music, not performing it for applause, but breathing it into every day. One Sunday afternoon, Tom stepped into the studio as she was dusting the piano. He leaned against the door frame, smiling. "You know what the town's been calling you?" She didn't look up. "Hopefully something kind. They're calling you the woman who awakened Edge Hill's voice. Not bad for a mom who used to sing lullabies in the kitchen." Laura laughed, gently pressing one key. "Maybe I needed this town more than it needed me. It gave me a reason to sing. Not to be heard, but to be whole." Tom walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've sung on one of the biggest stages in the world, and now you're singing in the smallest. But what I love most," he paused, "is that you sing with the same heart in both." Outside, a spring breeze stirred the early blossoms just beyond the window. Light spilled across the corner of the room where Ellie now sat, studying one of her mother's compositions. And Laura knew her music didn't live on stages anymore. It lived in mornings, in shared breath, in quiet rooms where truth had space to rise. Her voice was no longer buried in silence. It had returned, not to conquer the world, but to reach those who had forgotten how to listen to themselves. And sometimes a song doesn't need to be loud. It only needs to be sung in the right place, at the right moment, with a heart that's learned how to sacrifice, and that is enough to move the world to stillness. Before the story fades. If you believe in stories that echo quietly but deeply, stories of quiet strength, sacrifice, and rediscovery, stay with us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, we'd be honored to have you join us. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell, because every day we share moments like this. Reminders that the softest voices can carry the most meaning, and that sometimes the most powerful performances don't happen on the world's biggest stages, but in the smallest rooms, where truth has space to rise.